All right, everybody, welcome back. So this week, as I mentioned before, we're going to start the dreaded process of learning UV mapping. Today it begins. Today our journey and struggle of understanding this whole UV mapping workflow begins. So we're going to be throwing some really kind of conceptual out there stuff at you today. So just hang on. It's going to be an exciting ride. I'm going to go through it as slow as I possibly can as we explore what in the world UV maps are, how do we make them, and their role inside the larger game art process. Before we get started with the content of the lecture in the lab today, let's just go over to the GCOM 424 page and check out the learning materials that I've assembled for you in the Understanding UV Maps section. Okay, a couple things. Here's a cool little video. There used to be an organization called Gorilla CG, and they made a fantastic little introductory video as to what in the world a UV map is. So I implore you to watch this video on your own. I think a lot of our content today is going to be mirrored in that link. And what is it saying there, Austin? It's no longer working? Oh, it's a plugin. Yeah, that's a browser issue. Here's my thing, and what Austin's running into, he's looking at the web on Firefox, and it looks like the Flash plugin on that machine is a little outdated. Switch over from Firefox, go to Chrome, okay? I think just in general, Chrome is such a better experience than some of the other web browsers out there. The only reason I really suggest Chrome over others is that it's always update. It updates on the back end. Okay, it automatically updates all the plugins for you on the back end. Yeah, and now it's working for you, right, Austin? Yeah. It's just, it really is a better experience because I don't know about you guys, but I really hate when I'm like surfing the web, I'm on YouTube, or I go to a website and then all of a sudden it's like, you don't have the right version of this plugin. And it's like, son of a gun, I just want to watch the darn video, right? Chrome, since it updates in the background, you're never going to run into that problem. So check out this video on the introductory section, or the introduction section of the course page. I think it's a nice overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Our homework this week is going to be kind of fun. You may have already kind of gotten a hint at what we're doing from the feature image on this week's course page. We're making a wine barrel. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to be focusing all of our efforts on a series of much smaller projects, okay? The best way to learn and understand this entire process is to start small and on simple shapes, okay? So we're not going to be working on like airplanes and cars and fully articulated, detailed levels. We're going to start with very simple props. Now the props that I've chosen for us to build over the next couple of weeks can and should be used inside of your own professional library of models. Because if you look around almost every single game, what do you find stumbling around these levels? A wine barrel. Or an oil barrel, There's always going to be a crate. There's always going to be a dumpster that you're going to be running into. So a number of the projects that I've designed in the upcoming weeks can be used and should be used in future levels, okay? At the end of this semester, you're going to be building and detailing an entire game level by yourself. All of these projects that we do early on can and should be used in that final project, okay? So we're kind of building, to a certain degree, a library of props that we can use in other projects, which is totally cool. I'm all about that, all right? So we're going to be making a wine barrel. As you can see, it's going to be a pretty detailed wine barrel. It is going to be entirely game ready, okay? So we'll come back to that here in a minute. So it's not going to be, bazillions of polygons. We really want to start looking critically at how many polygons we're using to describe the shape. When you're working with game ready assets, we have to consider the performance of the shape, or excuse me, of this model within our game engine. So that's going to be our homework, a wine barrel. It's going to be due at the beginning of class next week. More on this as we go through it. I've given you some really great examples of some successful projects down here at the bottom. So peruse this over the course of the day. We'll come back to this here in a minute. Our lab is going to be something that we're going to do together, and it's just titled UV Lab 1. I know from my experience working inside this industry and from teaching this class that at times we just need practice, okay? We just need practice with the tools, with the workflow, and understanding, in this case, the UV mapping process. So today we're going to get that practice. We're going to get our hands dirty, and you're going to be UV mapping those three simple shapes and then throwing just a really quick default texture on them just to get us out the door, okay? More on that here in a minute. All right, so that's going to be our lab. We're going to have a lot of time in class today, or we should have a lot of time in class today to really get hands-on with this lab assignment. You should, at the end of class, be done with this, or very, very close to it. Okay? As always, I've assembled some learning resources that you can find in the Resources tab. You're going to need some help, okay? You're going to need some help refreshing your brain and understanding the sequence of UV mapping. So I've put, 5 videos there that I created just for this class and just for this conversation that in many ways is going to reinforce and underscore all the big concepts that we're talking about today, okay? And in addition, under important documents, there's the file that you're going to need for your lab work, okay? So it's not just like any cube, any sphere, any cylinder. I've given you the specific Modo Luxology file that I would like you to use for this project, okay? All right, questions, questions, questions. Everyone good? Everyone understand? All right. Let's jump back over into Modo and yeah, Carlos, hit me. It's just an environment map, something that you can find inside the environment preset section in your preset library. Okay. I'm sorry, I can't understand you, Carlos. Yeah, of your choice. Yeah, we always want to make sure that we're using an environment preset for all of our renders. It's just going to increase the production value of our shots, okay? We don't, gone are the days of having just a simple black background in all of our renders. There's no reason to make your renders incredibly basic by adding, that X. Someone once told me that the difference between doing a good job and a great job is 10%. 10% more effort. For me, these small little things like environment maps, clean, distortion-free UVs is that 10%. It steps you into that professional world almost instantly. Every time you work on a project in here, every project, and especially in this class and absolutely in GCOM 410, you should be, and 426, you should be thinking that these projects are going to go in my portfolio of work, okay? So putting forth that extra 10% is going to give you an image that you're going to be very comfortable showing within inside of our professional community, okay? Always, always, always think, how am I going to be able to use this in my portfolio, okay? I did that when I was going through my, my kind of academic career. Every time I made something, I always thought, okay, I wanted this to be a portfolio piece, okay? Use this time in college to start creating a library of assets and renders that you can use to show your quality of work and your technical skill when you're ready to transition into the workforce, okay? Basically what I'm saying is take advantage of your time. Doing good work is going to yield you with some pretty amazing results. All right, for the gentleman that just walked in, what was your last name? Dow, right? Yeah. Hua, all right. Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning of the class today that we're going to be talking about UV mapping. So let's just kind of jump in and take a look at what a UV map is and start understanding its component pieces. And we're going to start off redonkulously simple today. Okay? We're going to start off with a cube. I'm a big believer that whenever we're learning a new concept, a new idea, we should distill that idea into its most simple component shape. And for us, a cube gives us that most simple component shape. So I'm just going to make a unit primitive cube inside my scene. I would encourage you to follow along because when you start seeing all of this stuff in action in front of you, you're going to get a really great understanding of how all of this works. Okay. There we go. So there's my little simple cube. Nothing too fancy. Okay. However, when we're working inside the game art process, we need to, kind of almost simultaneous when creating the model, we need to be thinking about how we're going to texture this thing, okay? Now, from our experience thus far inside of our 3D modeling kind of ecosystem, what in Modo allows us to determine how this is going to look when we render it? The material and the larger architecture that we're going to be playing within is called what? What's the name of that tab? No? In the render section, everyone knows it. It's the shader tree, right? The shader tree allows us to determine how this object is going to look when we hit that render button, right? Well, here's the big dark secret. Actually, it's not even a big dark or a secret of the game world. We don't get a shader tab, okay? If we want our object to look a very specific way in our game engine, we have to create a texture map, a diffuse texture map that determines the skin color, if you will, of our object. So we can't rely on the shader tree anymore to figure out how our objects are going to look inside of our game engine. So what that means is that we're going to have to create a whole series of diffuse texture maps that determine how our object's going to look in our real-time rendering engine, our game engines. Okay? The only way to take control of this diffuse texture map process or creating a diffuse texture map is to have a UV map. Okay? I want to show you some examples here of why the UV map process is so important and what we gain by working with UV maps. Okay? For example, I have, or let's see here, I am going to go grab, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to, in a polygonal selection set, I'm going to throw all the polygons for my little guy here, there we go, into a material called test. Okay? We can still use materials. It's a fantastic way of working. It allows us to stay organized within inside of our shader tree. But I'm going to rely not on the material itself, but on a diffuse texture map to determine the quality, or excuse me, to determine the look of this object. Okay? And let's do this. I'm going to go add layer, and I'm just going to throw in an image map here. Let's do this. Let's go into the bowels of my machine. I will find it here momentarily. I apologize. I had a logo. Of course. Okay, hold on 2 seconds. Seriously? Okay, you know what? Let's do this. We go to the Google. And I'm just going to type in Starbucks. Starbucks logo. There it is. Images for Starbucks logo. Now I want to place this Starbucks logo somewhere along the outside surface of my cube. So let's just grab some of these. And let's just see if I can get pretty good resolution. Oops, that's not what I want. Come on, Google, participate. Work with me, Google, work with me. There we go. This will work. This has a transparent background. I'm borrowing this from Google just temporarily. I'm not going to use it for a render, so if the lords of Starbucks are watching my live stream today, don't worry, I'm not going to use this. Okay, so I'm just going to go into that material group, and I'm going to load that image that I just saved somewhere on, there it is, Starbucks PNG, onto my guy. And there we go. So this is what we often achieve when we place a 2D image map onto our guy, right? Now, in the shader tree, we get access to a number of different projection types that allow us to change how this 2D image is being wrapped and kind of deformed around the surface of our cube. Now, during the entirety of this texture mapping and UV mapping process, here's what I want you to do. Whenever I hear texture map, I want you and your brains to think that a texture map is kind of like the wrapping paper of a birthday present, okay? And we're taking that flat two-dimensional image and we're very carefully bending it around the surface of our shape, and that's the result that we're getting. Yeah?
I've got an image that is already sort of designed to be wrapped around the cube, so it's like you've got 6 sides.
Yeah. You don't want to take that image. Yeah, you could chop it up in Photoshop to get you the result, but more on that later. Okay, we'll get there, Dylan. So the goal of this right now is to get this Starbucks logo on each side of the cube. Okay, so I want one Starbucks logo per each side. So it's kind of like our game dice, right? Kind of like our game dice where we had all those little dots showing up across each side of our cube, right? Using traditional kind of texturing practices, what would I need to change on this image map in the shader tree to get my desired result? What would I need to change? What's responsible for placing a texture on a piece of geometry in all 3D modeling applications? The texture locator, absolutely. The texture locator is going to allow us to position this texture where we want inside of our three-dimensional scene. In Modo, let's just check it out real fast. Simply clicking on the image map will bring open all of its properties downstairs. Okay? And if you look very carefully, we have a tab here called Texture Locator. And this is going to allow us to change how this texture is interactively mapped across the surface of our geometry. Now, the default is UV map. We're going to come back to this, but I want to show you how we can use these other traditional projection types to get the desired result and how it compares to a UV map. Okay? So I'm going to change my projection type down here kind of in the middle of my properties panel from UV map to, oh, I don't know, let's figure one of these out real fast. Now, what basic shape is my object? It's a cube. So maybe we'd use the cubic projection type. Let's see what happens when we use that cubic projection type. There it is. Let me zoom out so we can see what the result is. And ha-ha, there it is. Beautiful. It's done a fantastic job. So what has happened? The computer is looking at each side of this cube and is stamping, if you will, this texture once on each side of that cube. Okay? Now, this is happening globally all across the contents of that material group, or excuse me, across the texture locator. All right? In any polygons that that material group has been assigned to is going to get this texture cubically projected across the surface of our geometry. Now, this is great. I love these global projection types. They give us a tremendous amount of control. They're relatively easy to work with because our texture locators allow us to use these transform information, so the position, rotation, and scale of the texture locator, to determine how it's going to show up on the actual geometry. So maybe I want my guy to be a little bit smaller. Okay, what if I want my Starbucks logo to be smaller? What value inside of my texture locator do I need to change? The size, the scale value, right? These guys in here, right now, at a default of 1 meter, you can see the result. However, if I decrease that to, oh, I don't know, 1 centimeter perhaps. There we go. Ah, it didn't do it across all three. 1 centimeter. Now, okay, maybe 1 centimeter was a little too small because now I got a bunch of them. Now it's repeating that. It's basically has made that Starbucks logo 1 centimeter, and it's tiling that texture across each side of my little cube. Okay. In a traditional entertainment pipeline, this is rad. Okay, because a lot of the shapes that we're working with inside of most things are going to be kind of planes or cylindrical or cubic in nature. So this is a fast way for us to texture something quickly. Okay. And we get a tremendous amount of control as to how that texture is going to be drawn on the surface of our geometry. Okay? Excuse me. Pretty cool. I like it. I like it a lot. What if I only want one? Yeah, what if I only want one of these? Let's make this bigger. Okay, this is a Modo thing. If you're used to working with texture locators, I want to show you something that's really kind of neat. Modo has a really, really cool texture locator system. If you hit the O key on your keyboard and bring open your viewport properties, inside of the visibilities section, yeah, just make sure show texture locators is on, and we should see it. Let me zoom out a little bit here. You also need to be in item mode. Texture locators are actually classified as items. In all honesty right now, I have my texture locator selected, but it matches the exact same size as my cube. so it doesn't look like I have anything. If I was to interactively scale this texture locator in item mode, you'll see it change and update on the surface of my mesh. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm in my item mode. I got my texture locator selected. So if I just hit the R key, check it out. There we go. It's kind of a little deceiving. Well, maybe I don't have my texture locator selected. Excuse me. Here, I'm going to go over into Setup. There it is. There's my texture locator. I just scaled it up and we're on our way. Let's go back over to Model. Yeah, it was actually, the texture locator was so small, it was 1 centimeter in size in the center of my, excuse me, it was 1 centimeter in size in the center of my cube, which is why I wasn't able to see it. But now that I have it selected, I can interactively change the size of it. Okay. I mentioned before, maybe I only wanted to stamp my little Starbucks logo on one side or once on each side. I don't want it to repeat. Okay. You can see that it's just going to repeat both horizontally and vertically. Does anyone remember how to turn this off? It's really easy. It's inside your texture locator properties. If you look at the texture locator, if we just grab it, here's my image, texture locator. Excuse me. There we go, texture locator. Check it out. What we're going after here is the horizontal and vertical repeat. These two parameters right here determine how this texture is going to be tiled across the surface of our mesh. If it's on a repeat, it's just going to stamp it horizontally and vertically infinitely. It'll never stop stamping it. However, if we change this to reset, let's do it real fast. Boom. Reset on both the horizontal and vertical repeat values. Check it out. Now it's only tiling that texture once. Okay? And it's not repeating it. Don't be alarmed by all this kind of junk here on the sides. That's not going to show up on the render. Case in point, let's just click on RayGL real fast and take a preview render of this cube. There it is, and that's the result that we're going to get. Okay? What you're seeing there in the OpenGL viewport, we get that little kind of garbage on the side, is the computer just telling us that there's, it can be repeated left and right and up and down. Okay? But it's not, that's the way it's going to look. Okay? I like working with texture locators. Modo makes it very easy for us to work with texture locators. But in the game art process, we don't get this. Okay? We don't get texture locators. We don't have projection types. The only thing we get are UV maps. Okay? Up until now, what we've been doing is interactively determining the location of this object along the surface of our mesh. The texture locator did that for us, and it did it quite nicely across the surface of my little cube. We don't get the texture locators inside of our game engines. Okay, we don't get that. The only thing we get is a UV map. So let's talk about how we can use a UV map to get a very, very similar result. Excuse me. Okay, I'm going to go over to my UV tab. Let's start taking a look at what we got here. Okay, I'm going to change some settings in this OpenGL viewport over here just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see what's going on. Okay, there we go. All right, so welcome to your new home away from home for the next 2 or 3 weeks. The UV mapping window allows us to create 2-dimensional versions of our 3-dimensional polygons. Inside this window, we'll be able to choose which part of our texture is going to show up on which part of our polygon. Okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Before we jump into the mechanics of a UV map, let's just take a real quick tour. I forgot to mention that. Okay? You're going to find that with most of the Modo layouts, the interface has changed ever so slightly to bubble to the surface, if you will, all of the awesome UV mapping tools. Okay? You're going to love UV mapping. You are. Okay? Especially if you're coming from another application. The Modo UV mapping tools are far superior to most things on our market. I used to do a lot of UV mapping in Maya, and it used to drive me crazy. Okay? The tool set is archaic, and and I hate to say this on a live stream, but it's just dumb, okay? The way the Autodesk guys have designed their workflow, well, there is not a workflow. There isn't any sort of artistic process that encourages our flow of information through this step, okay? Modo has phenomenal UV mapping tools. So good that I UV map everything now. I very rarely used to UV map anything. I mean, it was so difficult and so stupid hard and such a monumental pain in my rear end that I was like, nope, not going to do it because that's not how I want to spend my time, okay? Because these tools are so good, I can go back in and UV map everything now and get very, very good results quickly, okay? I love it, and you guys will too. It's a little bit daunting and a little bit intimidating at first, but you guys will get the hang of it. All of our tools are over here, okay? These are all the UV mapping tools, well, most of the UV mapping tools. As with many of the layouts inside of Modo, you can see that at the top of the screen here, you have access to all of our modeling tools. We also have access to some really cool new tools inside of Modo as the 601 called the UV Sculpt palette. More on that much later, okay? This is really kind of important if you're doing UV maps for characters, which we'll talk a little bit about as we get a little bit further on in the semester. Below, we have a whole bunch of really great UV tools. I think you're going to find that most of these are pretty rock solid. I like them. I've had generally a really solid experience working inside of these tool sets. Now, this window in here, this is a special environment, okay? This is our UV grid. We'll talk about this here in a second, but this is going to be where all of our UV islands are going to populate. Okay, this is where they're going to hang out. These little white cubes on the interior of our UV grid are our UV islands, okay? So this is a UV island, okay? We can have a whole series of separate discontiguous UV islands. The sum of all of these UV islands is called a UV map, okay? So the map is everything. And then each one of those little pieces, each one of the little white cubes on the interior of your UV map is a UV island, okay? Now that we have the vernacular down. Okay, one thing to note, this is a window that you can make larger and smaller. You're going to find at times it's a whole lot easier to work with your UVs and to edit your UVs if you make your environment a little bit bigger and then just zoom in and go crazy with it. It's really important that we have both our UV grid open and an OpenGL viewport so that we can interactively see how our UV map is influencing the wrapping of our texture on our model. So it's really important that we have both. I recommend almost at every single stage of the game, they have both windows open at the exact same time, okay? And then as we often do, our lovely, lovely, lovely item list and properties tab on the right. Okay, so let's talk about what we're seeing here on the center of our screen, or excuse me, on the center of our UV grid. This UV grid is a unique workspace. Okay, it's the only place inside the Modo sphere that you're going to see this UV grid. Its sole purpose is to edit the location of UV islands within our UV map. Okay, so what is a UV island? What are these little white cubes and these white shapes in the center of our grid? Dylan, go ahead. Yeah, Dylan's got it right. It is my cube. These are polygons. These white cubes over here are polygons. However, are they 3D polygons? No. They're two-dimensional representations of their 3D counterparts over here. So in many ways, this is a 2D environment, and this is 3D, okay? The polygons are the same. It really is the exact same bit of information. However, anything that we do inside of our two-dimensional UV window isn't going to harm our three-dimensional guys. So if I was to go around and start moving these polygons in our UV grid, it wouldn't physically move their location inside of the 3D scene, okay? There is a relationship between the two. This environment in our UV grid is entirely dedicated towards the UV process, texture mapping. That's all we're going to do. So we're not going to be like beveling or slicing inside of that window. It's just to texture. That's its sole role inside of this environment. There is a connection between the 2D and 3D polygons. If I was to go into my polygon selection set at the top of the screen, you can see that when I click on that top UV island, its 3D counterpart also becomes selected. Vice versa is also plays into account. If I was to select this polygon here, you can see that its two-dimensional counterpart inside of the UV window also gets selected. Okay? So these are the same shapes. We just have a 2D version and a 3D version. So that's kind of weird. That concept is kind of odd. And this is usually the part where the train derails and everyone goes, what? A 2D version of a 3D polygon? I don't get it. Let me help you out. I mentioned earlier that I wanted you to pretend that this was a birthday present, right? And that texture maps were going to be the wrapping paper on the birthday present. Okay? Let's take that one step further. The UV map is kind of like the wrapping paper on a birthday present. Okay? Now, what's difficult for 3D modelers is that our birthday present, when we make it, is already wrapped. Okay? We have to then go back in and very carefully, you guys have done this, I know you've done this at one point in your life, probably in your early childhood as I did, right? Where you very carefully like peeled back the tape on your birthday present, right? Just to kind of peek in, see what it was, right? You couldn't rip the paper because then mom and dad would know that you were sneaking a peek, right? And you weren't allowed to do that, okay? But if you very carefully like, peeled back the tape, not damage the paper, everything would be okay, right? Well, we kind of have to do the same thing. We have to very carefully peel back the tape on our wrapped birthday present and take all that wrapping paper and lay it down flat, okay? That flat thing that we get is our UV map, okay? Another way of thinking of this is like the pattern of a dress, okay? I had a friend of mine in college that was very, very into fashion, and she made a tremendous amount of clothing herself. And every once in a while, I'd catch her making some of her dresses, and some of her apparel. And I was always amazed in the process that she worked. It was kind of cool watching her make the patterns. Okay, all pieces of clothing start out flat, right? Why does a shirt start out as a flat piece? It's a piece of cloth, right? It's also easier to manufacture. So it needs to be kind of like two-dimensional. So in many ways, what we're seeing there on our left is kind of the pattern for our dress. It's all of our three-dimensional polygons laid flat on the ground. Okay? Kind of making sense? Getting it to a certain degree? Okay. So that's what a UV map is. What's its role inside of our larger process? Why do we use a UV map? How is it important? Well, since we're working within the game art pipeline, UV maps allow us to interactively select and position textures within our scene. Okay? I'm going to go back to my texture locator, my shader tree, and take my little Starbucks logo here and change its projection type to UV map. Now, a unit primitive cube, if you're following along, is automatically going to generate a UV map for you. So I didn't make this. We'll make a new one here momentarily. Let's go into my texture locator, and I want to change its projection type back to UV. There we go. All right, let's talk about what we've got going on here. Because a lot of folks, they get confused as to how this UV map is influencing the wrapping of their texture across their model.
My cube on the UV map thing, squares are red. What does that mean?
So if the squares are red, we're going to come back to that. But the big picture idea is that if you have red UVs, that means you have two polygons inside of your UV map that are right on top of each other. That's not in itself a bad thing, but they're sharing what we call the same UV space. More on that in a minute. So this is what I got. Let's just talk about how the UV map is determining the wrapping of this image around our model. Okay? Because all texture maps, it really is, in my mind, like a piece of wrapping paper. And we're just very carefully bending that texture up and around the surface of our mesh according to the pattern that we've created on the left-hand side of the screen. Okay? Our UV environment has a very custom scale and a very custom, unique grid system. If you look closely here, we have a grid that's broken in to 4 quadrants on our computer. Okay, check it out. There we go. This grid plays a critically important role. So specifically what I'm talking about, there we go. Something kind of like that. So here's quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, real quick, this is a two-dimensional grid. It's a Cartesian grid. Go back to 10th grade geometry for me for just 2 seconds, okay? When we're plotting points on a two-dimensional grid like this, the origin is where on our grid? 0, 0. And another way to visually see it is what? Where is the origin visually? The center. And Dow? Yeah, bingo. At the intersection of those two axes, the U and the V axis. Okay? If you look carefully, we have two unique axes. This is not X and Y on our grid. It is, this is U, and this is V. Okay? U and V. There's only one quadrant inside of this entire setup, inside of this entire grid, where we're going to plot positive values for both the U and the V axis. Which quadrant is it? 2. Quadrant 2. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The upper right-hand quadrant is the only quadrant inside of this grid where we're going to get positive values for V and positive values for U. Over here, in quadrant 1, we'd get positive values for V, but we'd get negative values for U. Quadrant 3 is what? V is positive or it's negative, yep. And then U is negative. And then quadrant 4 will have negative V, positive U. This one is important to us, okay? In order for our texture to be wrapped correctly around our object, we must have all of our UV islands within the positive UV workspace. And you're going to hear me talk about that positive UV workspace a lot over the next couple of weeks. It's the most important area of our grid, and this is where all of our UV islands need to reside. So keep an eye out, a weathered eye, for that upper right-hand quadrant. That's where we need to play. Okay. Whenever you create a unit primitive, Modo is automatically going to create UV islands and place those UV islands in the upper right-hand quadrant, the positive UV quadrant. And you can see instantly how that texture is being wrapped across the surface of our geometry. But why is it being mapped that way? It's kind of odd, okay? Let's check it out. Let's get comfortable with the orientation of our little cube here. Let's see. Okay, so on this side, we can see the woman's face and her hair. At the bottom, we have the O and the F. On this side of the cube, we see the right-hand portion of the little mermaid. Okay, let's just hang out on this side. Yeah, because there's some landmarks in here that make sense and that are pretty easy to see. Since we're working with UV maps, our texture is going to be flooded inside of our positive UV quadrant. All of our textures that we create are going to be square. All of them, okay? Because our positive UV quadrant in its totality is a square shape. If you look at my Starbucks logo, I specifically chose this logo because it was square. And to kind of highlight what I'm talking about here, square. It's not a rectangle, you know, it's not, oops, that's not what I'm talking about. It's not, you know, something like that. It's not portrait. It is a perfect square. All of our textures need to be a perfect square so that they take up, so that they fill the positive UV quadrant, okay? Good texture artists fill the positive UV quadrant with as much of their texture as they can. So we take, you know, so we can use that space efficiently. Let me zero this out so we can see what's going on. Okay, so you can see my texture in the background of my UV quadrant. And wherever this UV island is within that texture is going to determine what shows up on that polygon. Okay, and let's pick a better example. Let's use a polygon down below that where we can easily see the O and the F. If I select it here, look what happens to this guy. We can see the O and the F just on that polygon. It's not showing up on any other polygon because that's where this UV island is residing within our texture map. If we look at this polygon on our UV, we can see that this polygon right now is sitting on top of the left-hand portion of our Little Mermaid. So we're only seeing that part of her face, okay? UV maps allow us to interactively place objects within our textures in very, very specific locations, okay? We get to control exactly where this texture is going to show up. In addition, UV maps allow us to it allows us to play inside of a workflow called baking. Much more on that later. We're going to be doing a lot of baking in here, and I don't mean cakes or cookies, although that would be fantastic. Really would love a cookie right now. That'd be great. Baking allows us to extract a whole bunch of high-resolution information and apply it to our low-resolution mesh. Okay, we're actually going to start that process next week. We're going to jump into baking and kind of get going. Okay. UV mapping allows us to place textures where we want them to go. With a UV map, we're in charge. We're not letting the computer and these projection types determine how this texture is going to be mapped onto our object. We're determining how the shape is going to be mapped onto our object. To further kind of illustrate how UV maps are going to determine which part of the image is going to show up on that polygon, okay, I'm going to grab that bottom one. Now, just visually remember that on this bottom polygon, the texture is right. The O and the F of the texture is inside this polygon. However, what would happen if I moved that polygon in my UV space? For example, if I moved it to the right here, if I moved it that way, what do you think would happen to the texture? You got it. I'm just going to fire off the move tool. Look what happens to that bottom polygon. I'm placing that polygon in my UV map over the E and the word coffee, and you can see clearly that on the actual geometry itself, that's what's showing up on the polygon. Okay? Say again? Yeah, absolutely. So since these are all connected together in their current form, anything that I do to one is going to influence another, right? And that's what we get. The face of my woman is now a little bit distorted, and we're getting some red show up in my UV space, which signifies that we have two UV islands that are on top of each other and are sharing the exact same space. If we look closely, yeah, it's these guys in here that are causing the problems, and we get this massive, crazy warp. I want to hit undo for a moment and just put that guy back to where he was. We can separate all of our UV islands out from each other. Okay, now if you're following along, try this real fast. This is actually kind of cool. And this I think kind of also underscores and reiterates the role of UV maps within inside of our pipeline. I can break out all of these separate polygons into their own separate islands. Right now, they're all connected to each other. So whenever I move the bottom one, it messes up the top one. But maybe I don't want it to mess up the top one. If I select that polygon in my UV space and hit the Move tool, okay, here's the Move tool. Now, the Move tool inside the UV workflow is a little bit different, okay? There's two things that I want to show you. You can numerically move objects along the U and the V axis, but what I would like you to do, if you're following along, is turn on Tear Off, which is right here. Turn on Tear Off. And now I can move this shape. I can just separate it out. Boom. Its own piece now. Okay? All right. All right. I want to put that shape, that UV island, on top of the C and the O inside of my model, or inside my UV map, and you can see how the texture is showing up on my model. Okay? What if I grab this polygon, this one at the top of my UV map? I'm going to move it with Tear Off on, and I'm going to move it down to the exact same location as that other one. What's happening to my mesh? Or what's happening to the texture on my mesh? Two of them are getting the same picture because two UV islands are sharing the exact same part of my texture. Okay? Whatever is on the inside of my texture map in my UV island is what's going to show up on the actual texture inside my 3D OpenGL viewport. So if you look carefully, on my model. There's the top polygon. That one, it used to say the A and the R of Starbucks. Since I moved it down to the bottom, I now have two shapes that are getting the exact same, or excuse me, two polygons that are getting the exact same texture information. The top and the bottom are identical, okay? This in many ways is kind of like a coloring book. Whatever's on the inside of our UV island is what's going to be on the model itself, okay? Kind of making sense? Yeah? Getting it? If you're completely confused by this and this is overwhelming, I would like to just remind you, hang in there. You will have an aha moment. Okay, this happens every single semester. I've been doing this long enough to spot it from 1,000 miles away. There will be a light bulb that just kind of clicks on in your brain where you go, I got it. I got it. It's just a two-dimensional version of our three-dimensional polygons. I see the wrapping paper now. I understand that my UV island is like the pattern of a dress, and I get it. Whatever I color and paint on the inside of my pattern is what's going to show up on my model. Okay? You're going to have that moment. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. Until that moment, hang in there. Hang in there. Okay? Everyone doing good so far? Does anyone need me to back up, revisit a concept? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm having trouble trying to enable the
texture locator. Okay, let's take a look on your screen and see what's going on. Now, for what we're doing here, we don't need to use the texture locator, but let's just take a look-see at it. Okay. So jump over into your shader tree. There we go. Now, you don't have an image map on the inside of your system right now, which is why we're not getting a texture locator. Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's take this one step further, okay? We've talked a little bit about how we can work with these UV islands inside of our UV window, okay? We can select them. Just simply activating the Move tool will allow us to move these UV islands around our UV workspace, okay? Wherever it is on our scene represents the area of the texture that will be mapped to that object. So I think you can probably start to see the power behind all this. We're in the driver's seat. We get to control what goes where, okay, on the texture map and how that's going to influence the final look of our object. But how do we make UV maps? Now, if you're using a unit primitive, it's going to come with one. It's going to come with a UV map already created, and albeit a pretty bad UV map, this is not exactly what we want, okay? What we want to have on our UV map, oh, real quick, if you find this very annoying as I do, I really only like to see the image in the background of my UV grid occasionally. I would much rather see the outlines of my UV island. When you have a texture in the background of your grid, it makes it very difficult to see the outlines of your UV shapes. So here's how to change it. Here's how to get rid of it from the background of that grid. If you look closely in your shader tree, you can see that here's my material group, here's my image, and I just happen to have the texture locator for that image selected in my shader tree. If you don't have your image selected, okay, so if I select like the base shader, for example, it's going to make a liar out of me. It should have automatically deselected and it turned that off. So let me see what's going on here. You can also go into your viewport properties. Let's see. Here we go. Show image. Then when you click on it, no, that's something they must have changed. Well, that's a bummer. Say again? This guy. This one. Ah, yes, here we go. Show image. Show grid. And we want the grid. Yeah, we want the grid. We want those grid lines. Here's show image. That's another way of turning it on and off. But in 601, if you had the image selected, it would show up in the grid, and then if you deselected it, it would turn off in the grid. I wonder if that's something they changed in 701. Yeah. In the UV window? Maybe. I really don't know. It would be nice if you could. That'd be a nice feature. That'd be a great feature, actually. Okay. All right, well, we'll keep going, all right? If you look very, very carefully across the surface of my mesh, and let me find, yeah, here's a great example. If you look very carefully at the O in the word coffee on my Starbucks logo, it's a little distorted. It's not exactly circular. It should be circular. If you look at the original image, the O is almost a perfect circle. What we're getting here is a little bit of distortion. And if you look critically at that O, it's being squished vertically, okay? The texture map is being squished. The texture map is being squished because look at the UVs. The size, scale, and proportion of all of your UV islands should match their 3D counterpart. So what we see in our three-dimensional viewport should be a reflection of what we see in our UV window. Okay. Now, do my UV islands look like their 3D counterparts? Why not, Heather? Yeah, they're rectangular. That is a rectangle. Okay. I made a unit primitive. Okay. It's a cube. It's a perfect cube. So what we should be having inside of our UV map should also be a perfect cube. Okay? We need the proportions of our UV islands to match their 3D counterparts. Okay? It needs to be a 1-to-1 representation. If it's off ever so slightly, we're going to get a distortion, and we know likely the distortions. Okay? We want our UV maps to be as distortion-free as we can to ensure that when this texture is wrapped onto our model, it's wrapped correctly. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to squish this selected cube here, and I'm going to make it much narrower. Okay, it's going to be a really pronounced rectangle. As I mentioned before, any edit that we do to the UVs is not going to affect its 3D friend. So if I was to fire off the scale tool, look what happens to the texture over here. It continues to distort. It continues to get more and more warped along the surface of our mesh. This is no good, okay? We don't like this at all, okay? I need to have this UV island match the size, scale, and proportion of its 3D counterpart. Welcome to unwrapping. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be showing you guys a number of techniques that will allow us to extract distortion-free UV information from its 3D counterpart. We need to spend a lot of time understanding the role and the importance of these UV mapping tools so that when we're constructing our shapes, they're good to go. Okay? Ideally, you only want to UV map something uno times, one time. If you do it right, if you're very methodical, as I tend to be, you're only going to do it once. Okay? UV mapping, or excuse me, creating your UV maps is a laborious process. You're going to spend more time UV mapping the damn thing than you are modeling it 9 times out of 10. Okay? This week we're going to be working with a wine barrel. Okay? You're going to spend more time UV mapping your wine barrel than you are modeling your wine barrel. Okay? Next week we're going to be making some crates, some wooden crates. Okay? It's going to take us all of about 2 seconds to make our wooden crates. Okay? But it's going to take us maybe 45 minutes to make all the UV maps for them, okay? Yeah, it's welcome to UV mapping. It's not a fast process. It's incredibly slow. It's incredibly slow and incredibly laborious. If you get good at this, you will always have a job in the game industry because this is one of the things where you either love it or you hate it, okay? I love it. I find it very entertaining for me. It stimulates a part of my brain that makes me really compelled to make all my UV maps. And I know from my experience that the quality of my end result is going to skyrocket because I'm going to have the accuracy in my texture maps that I need to make something that looks photoreal. Okay? But getting there is a process, okay? Extracting all of our UV information from the surface of our mesh can at times be laborious. So let's walk through the process. Whenever we're making UV maps and creating our own custom UVs, we need to be methodical. We need to walk through this process slowly and methodically, okay? There are some ideas and some techniques that I'm going to show you here in a second that will help us craft and create some custom UVs. We need to kind of nuke all of these UVs. I want to start from scratch. I want to get rid of all of my UV islands on this mesh, okay? Here's kind of a back-end thing that's really, really, really important to understand. Or let me ask the question, where are your UV maps stored? Bingo, on the mesh item, okay? On the mesh item itself, that's where your UV map is stored. So if I was to go over to my item list for a second here, check it out. If I select my cube item, does anyone know where I can find my UV map inside the interface? I got my cube selected. I see all of their UVs in the UV window, okay? The lists tab, yes, this is it. This is where we find all of our UV maps, okay? Check it out. Where we're going is right here. You probably have never gone into the lists tab before. Now we're going to live in our lists tab, okay? Check it out. If we go into our lists tab, you'll find that we have a whole bunch of lists that we have at our disposal, one of which is really important. There it is, UV maps, okay? If we look at what's inside of that section, you can see that we have a whole series of UV maps, or actually in our case, we have just one UV map associated with this mesh item. Now this, if you have a whole bunch of items in your scene, this list is going to change depending on which item you have selected. So each UV map is stored on an item, okay? An item. My UV map is called texture. If you ever hand in a project file where your UV map is called texture, I'm going to fail you instantly, okay? Just off the top, I'm joking. Some people thought I was serious for a second. There were a couple people like, oh, he's serious about this. No, you just don't, you want to make sure you name your UV maps. Why? You might have a lot of them. Let me show you what I'm talking about, okay? Let me show you exactly why naming our UV maps is critically important. I want to open up a project file. I want to open up, let me just open up my Jeep. So this is my 1942 Jeep Willys that I made, last summer or the summer before. And I UV mapped 100% of this model, okay? Because I had UV maps across every polygon on my mesh, I was able to go in and interactively paint some, in my mind, some really good looking textures on the model, and it turned out quite beautifully, okay? However, there are certain components within my Jeep that have a lot of UV maps. Here's the actual model file itself, okay? There's my Jeep, pretty good looking Jeep. This was kind of an intellectual process for me. I wouldn't have done this if I was working at ILM, because it's way too many textures for a production-ready asset, and there's way too much geometry in all the wrong places. Because it was kind of like every summer I tend to do like a model, right? And because this was my summer project last year, or maybe it was the year before, I had some time just to kind of practice my skill on a couple areas. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You are never allowed to do this. If I catch you doing this, I'm going to really think poorly of you, okay? I'm going to really disrespect you. I'm joking. I'm not going to disrespect you. But don't do this because this is stupid. Admittedly, this is stupid. I'm always trying to get better at what I do. Let me just go into item mode and select my 50 cal. Now, I like my 50 cal. My 50 cal is kind of rad. However, and it's got some good textures on there, okay? You can see the texture map on the actual 50 cal itself. Rock and roll, looking pretty good. I'm digging it. There's a lot of good detail in there. It's a pretty badass looking handle, okay? I spent some time on it, right? However, here's the 50 cal. There's the actual weapon itself. Let me go, pretty good looking texture. High resolution textures. Let me just select the model for you and polygonal mode. Yeah, don't do that. Okay, it's all one piece. Don't do that. Don't do that. That model, if this was in production, I would never make it all one piece, okay? Because that model is 15,000 polygons, okay? It does not need to be 15,000 polygons. I could probably distill that down into about 1,000 in a heartbeat if I wanted it to be all separate pieces, which is probably the more practical way of doing this, okay? But since it's for, you know, a summer project and it's a portfolio piece, I didn't care, and I wanted to see if I could do it. And I've learned from my professional experience, or my personal experience, whenever if I can see if I can do it, leads me down a very bad path. Well, not a bad path, it's sometimes a laborious path. And it made UV mapping this thing a nightmare. It really did. It's quite a process of extracting all of my UV information. Let me take you to my lists tab here for a second. Yeah, here we go. So on this mesh item, I have 3 separate textures applied to this mesh item. 3 textures for my gun. Just for my gun, okay? That's it. You can see the UV maps that are showing up over there in my list. You can see that I got a barrel, base, and detail map. If we go over into my UV workflow here, my UV tab, we can start to see what each one of those UV maps look like. So there's the UVs just for the barrel of the weapon itself and some other things. Okay. Here's the base. It's all the UV islands for just the base of the weapon, which is kind of like the dark gray area, and then all the detail pieces. Okay. Tremendous amount of work. So you can have multiple UV maps on one mesh item. This is good. But here's kind of the trick. Okay. If you have multiple UV maps, that means you have multiple textures. Okay. You get one texture per UV map, okay? I have 3 UV maps, so I have 3 texture files. 3 separate Photoshop documents that are now driving the creation of that texture file. To show you what one of those looks like, just to kind of illustrate this process, I can open one up. Let me open up my Photoshop. We're going to be learning a lot about Photoshop in this class. Photoshop is going to be our image editor of choice. It's a great application. It's an industry standard application for making textures, so no matter where you go in our industry, Photoshop is going to be the workhorse for creating textures. You have to know Photoshop, in my opinion, to do this type of work. Let me show you, let's see if I can do this quickly here. And this is why you have to be organized, okay? This is why you have to name things, because if I had, I think there's 30 some odd, if I remember correctly, there's 30 some odd texture files that are on this object, okay? If I didn't have my stuff together, okay? If I wasn't organized, if I wasn't naming things in an intelligent manner, there'd be no way that I'd be able to go in and make all these textures and have the machine be able to understand their role and their application in a timely manner. So, wait for it. There's my texture file. There's the actual texture that's responsible for drawing the surface detail of my weapon. Okay? I made it. Yeah, you're going to find that, you know, much like geometry, there is no make me a weapon button in Photoshop. Okay, you have to take a whole bunch of individual pieces and kind of, you have to be a painter. You have to go in and you have to start painting your textures to get the result that you're after. So and why we like to do this and the control that we gain is that I can go in and I can localize texture detail on my texture map. If you look, this is a bad example. Well, actually, it's not that bad of an example. If you look very, very carefully here, I was able to go in. You see all of this in here, all those little scratches. I did that. Okay, that wasn't the machine determining where all this texture information was going. I said, this is the edge of my weapon. I know from my own personal experience with metallic objects that on corners the surface is going to rub off. So we should start to see through that surface to the metallic underlay below the paint. Okay? Because every object has layers, right? Even these iMacs in here, they have a protective top coat, then they have the aluminum, and there's probably something underneath the aluminum, okay? Well, what if I come up with a gigantic crowbar and scratch the surface of my iMac, which I'd never do, because I love these iMacs, these are great machines. We need to see all of those layers in the texture map to produce the realism that we need, okay? So UV maps give us the control that we're after. They're phenomenal. It's great. Is it a lot of work? Yeah, it's a lot of work, okay? But the result is kind of stunning. It really is quite good. I think it's quite good, okay? I'm a little biased because I made the damn thing, okay? But this is where we're going. Well, thank you, Carlos. I appreciate it. And let me show you one other one, and then we'll leave it at that. Here's the body of my Jeep. Or let's do the gas tank. I was really happy with the way my, no, that's not what I wanted. Hood, here we go. This is another cool texture that I made for this, and this kind of goes back to the control aspect of your object, okay? Letters and decals, okay? Every object on the face of the planet, okay, has some sort of lettering and some sort of decal on it. Well, because we're using diffuse texture maps that we craft, we get to determine what's going to show up on those diffuse texture maps, okay? We get to determine what the lettering and the decaling is all going to be about, okay? This is our opportunity to go in and create something that looks realistic, okay? And it always gives you an opportunity to do something fun. I always try to have fun with my texture maps. I always try to put little hidden Mickeys all over the place. You know, this is where you as a texture artist gets to have a lot of fun. I always relish in the opportunity to do this. Here's another example. This is actually the side of my Jeep. Okay? And if you look very carefully in here. Da-da-da. So this is kind of cool. You can go and put scratches. You know, I love little rust stain, oil stain, and dirt and smattering on the wheel wells. These are small details that really make your object come to life, right? This, you know, I was intentionally trying to make the surface of my Jeep look as though it had gone through war. Well, this is not factory fresh. This is not shiny and new. This thing is dirty. It is beat up. It's been scratched. It's been shot at, you know. This is a war horse in many ways. But this war horse also has a lot of personality and character, and we can get to that personality and character through our textures. And this is one of the ways that I always like to add personality and character. I always sign my work. I always sign my work as an artist. Always sign my work. Pac-Man. That's me. Does anyone put the pieces together real fast? Well, actually, if you don't know me that well, you won't be able to put the pieces together. My first name is, it's my initials, yeah. It's my initials. PAC is my initials. I've always gone by Pac-Man, so most things that I have professionally done, somewhere on the model says Pac-Man. So I thought I'd name my Jeep. So that's where you get to have fun with your textures, because you know the computer's not automatically making this stuff. We get to put our own personality interest in there. Usually whenever I have an opportunity to put numbers on something, they're numbers that are important to me. Like my wedding anniversary is almost in every single model that I've made since I've been married. Okay. So I don't forget. Yeah. Yeah. So it's fun stuff like that. It's fun stuff like that. Okay. So let's go back to Modo real fast. Now that we kind of understand what the role of UV maps are and how we're going to be using them, let's talk about how we can create them, because that's really the challenging bit in this process. Okay, I have my little cube here, and I need to delete the UV map that's existing on that cube, because I want to start over. I want to make my own UV map. I want to make my own custom UV map that is perfect, okay? Not the distortion-ridden UV map that we were working with before. So how do I delete my UV map, the one that says texture over there? You can right-click on it, and that right-click contextual menu is really important inside the Lists tab, because it gives us some really cool options that are important to point out. Okay, so there it is, texture. If I was to right-click on it, we have delete, okay, which is going to do what you think it's going to do. It's just going to delete that map from the mesh item. We also have rename, which is something you should do. Okay, you should rename all of your UV maps to represent what their role is, to what those polygons are going to be doing. Okay, we can also copy a UV map. We can paste UV information from one map to another. More on that at the end of the semester when we're really comfortable working inside this UV pipeline. And then this is the one that I actually really enjoy. Clear. It's going to keep the UV map in the mesh item. It's just going to delete the contents of it. So it's a fast way of kind of restarting. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose clear from this list. Watch what happens over here inside of my UV window. I hit clear, bye-bye. All the islands are gone. Okay? An important point to remember, this is a destructive edit. Okay? Once you delete them, they're gone. Okay? They're really gone, gone, gone. The only way to get your UVs back is to hit undo. Okay? So if you delete your UVs, close down Modo, and then restart Modo again, it's gone. They're gone, 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 gone. So just be careful. Buyer beware. Only you can prevent forest fires. All right? Let's rename my UV map real fast. Let's just call it cube. There we go. And we're on our way. So now we can start making our UVs. I mentioned before that whenever we're crafting our UVs or creating our UVs, we want to take it slow and we want to go methodically through this process. A lot of folks get in trouble when they try to automate the process of creating UVs, and trust me, it causes more problems than it solves. Okay? We're going to initially look at one tool, then we're going to take a break, we're going to come back in and look at our second tool. The first tool that we're going to look at is called Project from View. I love Project from View. I think you're going to find that Project from View is the most useful tool inside of our UV tool set. It really is quite good. Like most things in our Modo space, we have to start with a selection. So we have to individually select which polygons we want to project a UV from before we hit the button. So we're going to be doing this exact same thing 6 times because we've got 6 cubes. Each side of our cube is going to generate a UV independently from the others. So here's my little trick. Let's just do it real fast. You know what? To illustrate what's going on here, I think I'm going to do this. Inside of my shader tree, I want to delete my Starbucks logo. Bye-bye. And I'm going to open my preset. That's not what I wanted. F6 on your keyboard is the shortcut to bring open your preset window. Okay? And we're going to be using a material preset often in here. We like to ensure that the objects that we create inside of our UV window are going to map correctly, that are distortion free. The best way to check to see if our UVs are distortion free before we generate the texture file is to use a checker pattern. Okay? Modo comes with a fantastic material preset already crafted for you. It comes with a really cool rainbow texture. I like it a lot. It's inside your preset browser.
Which key is that again?
F6. F6. If your F6 key is doing something odd, hold down the function key, then F6. And if on those keyboards, the function key is over by the home key. Okay? Inside your preset window, where we need to go is into materials, and you're going to see some things in my preset browser that you don't have because I have some additional stuff installed. So if we go into materials, miscellaneous, UV checker, and if you just single left click on it, you'll see the little icon over here. It's in materials. You don't have it either. Okay. Not the end of the world. Not the end of the world. Do you guys have any presets at all installed in these machines? Okay. No miscellaneous, really. I wonder if they've changed this in 701. You have a... Yeah.
I went to images and I go to UV and that's where I have UV.
Okay. That works too. That works just as good. Okay, I'm happy with that. Let's see. Images and UV at the very bottom of that list, Chris. Keep going. One more time. One more. There it is, UV. And there's the actual rainbow texture pattern. Check it out, Tomoko. So go into Get Out of Materials and go into Images. And then UV. And then there's the rainbow checker pad. And you can use whatever, inside that images folder, you can use whatever checkered grid you want, okay? Whatever you do, don't use the one that looks like a cross. Don't use this one. Don't use that one. That one's going to cause problems, okay? You want to have a texture file. Like this one's fine, that one's fine, these are all fine, just don't use that one. It needs to be a square texture, okay, for us to use this correctly, okay? So also please note that I have a material group already established for the polygons on my model, okay? If you have your material group selected, anything that you add inside your preset library will automatically be applied to that group. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to double click on this logo and nothing's going to happen. So let's drag and drop it into the group. That worked, okay? There we go. You can see the image just hanging out over there, but it's not mapped. My cube is green. So if we go into our Properties tab, check out the texture locator. Let's go to texture. Why are we now seeing this? There we go. Wait, Yeah, my locator's set to UV map, set to cube. Oh, I deleted the UVs. Yeah, duh, that's why. Yeah, thank you, Carlos. Yeah. Okay. You're absolutely right. Okay, so now we're ready to go. I like using these checker patterns to test my distortions, okay? So here's how we're going to use the Project from View tool, okay? Here's how we're going to use Project from View. We start with a selection. I'm going to select one side of my cube. Once I have my selection already kind of dialed in, there it is. If I go, it's the the second tool in your list, Project from View. The way Project from View works is that we select our polygon, we turn on the tool, and then we get to determine which viewport to project our UV from, okay? Click here. You've got to click in an OpenGL viewport for this tool to work. Watch what happens to my screen when I click in this viewport. Bam. You can see in the center of my UV grid, a UV has been generated. Okay, it's a white outline, the white box. Mine's orange at the moment because I have it selected. All right. However, look at its size, scale, and proportion. What size is it from, or what's wrong with it? Absolutely. Okay. So does this shape here look like its three-dimensional counterpart? It does from this view, okay, but it should be a square, not this weird kind of trapezoidy looking thing, all right? This is what happens when the size, scale, and our proportion of our UVs don't match their 3D counterpart. Look at my grid. This is a checker pattern. And look how it's being displayed on the actual model itself. That doesn't look like a checker pattern. That doesn't look like a perfect grid, right? It looks like some weird kind of roller coaster ride going on, okay? Bad, very bad. We don't want this, okay? So when you're using Project from View, we have to be a little bit careful. Let me show you the power user shortcut that's going to make Project from View work perfectly. When you're using Project from View, it's basically going to take a snapshot of that polygon in its current orientation within our three-dimensional scene. Let me do it again, and I'll make it really, really obvious. Okay, so there's my polygon. There's my my object. If I was to grab that polygon, do Project from View once more, and then click, you can see that the orientation of that polygon showing up over here in our 3D viewport is how it's going to look over here in our UV. It's taking a picture of that polygon and making a two-dimensional UV from it. We need our picture to be dead perfect, okay? So here's the power user keyboard shortcut that will automatically align your OpenGL viewport to look directly at that polygon to ensure that we get a perfect snapshot. You're going to hold down the control button. Then you're going to hold down the shift and then A. Make sure your mouse is in the OpenGL viewport. Okay, Control Shift A. Check it out. Control Shift A. Oops. Oops. Control Shift A. There it is. It's automatically going to align the orientation of the user's camera inside the OpenGL viewport to look dead on at that polygon. Control Shift A. Make sure the polygon's selected. Control Shift A. Once you're looking dead on at that polygon, do project from view. Watch what happens on my screen when I do it on up here, okay? I'm going to fire off project from view. Now, where am I going to click with inside of my interface? Yeah, on the viewport. Boom. Now look at my object. Look at my UV. Look at how the texture map is being wrapped along that along the surface of my mesh. Bingo. This is what we want, okay? We have a perfectly square UV island that's filling 100% of our positive UV quadrant. And if we look at the result of that, the texture is being mapped distortion-free across the surface of my mesh.
What are the negative areas of the UV grid? What are they used for?
The negative areas of a UV grid are useful. And actually in 701, they've increased the value of the negative areas of our UV grid to include some really exciting stuff. It's going to help us out when we bake things. More on that later, okay? So they're not useless areas. There's actually some really nice tools that we can use in there. You can put things in the negative portions of your UV grid. You don't want to do that unless you're tiling a texture. More on that about week 7 or 8-ish when we start doing buildings. Okay? So we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Okay? All right. Let's do it 5 more times. 5 more times real fast. Okay? So I'm going to select that top polygon. What's the power user keyboard shortcut that's automatically going to align my viewport to look dead on at that top polygon? Control Shift A. And then we'll be good to go. Control Shift A. Project from view. Click on the viewport, and we're on our way. Now at this point, if you're following along with me, you should get a red polygon in the center of your UV workspace. This is normal. This is just Modo telling us that we have the front polygon and the top polygon sharing the exact same UV space. They're overlapping. Now at times, this is no biggie. Other times, it's going to be a massive issue that we'll want to resolve. If all of our UV islands are in the exact same space, all of those UVs, or excuse me, all of those polygons are going to get the exact same texture information. This is not so good when we start working with like the wine barrel, for example, coming up this week. We don't want all of our wine barrel pieces to look identical from one to each other. Okay, so we got to be careful. For right now, we'll be fine because we're just going through the process of learning how to use project from view. All right. So I can grab it again. Control Shift A, project from view, click. Drop the tool, Control Shift A, project from view, click, drop the tool, select the new one, Control Shift A, project from view, click, and then I think I got to grab that bottom one, Control Shift A, clicky, there it is. Now I have perfect distortion UVs across the entirety of my mesh. Okay, it's a great, great tool. I love project from view. Okay. Project from view is the most applicable on planar surfaces, right? Because, you know, for cubic objects, perfect, perfect, perfect. The tops of cylinders that are flat, planar, perfect tool for the top of a cylinder. Would it be good for using like the teapot? Probably not. No, not so much because it's not planar. Project from view, only want to do it on planar surfaces. Planar being what? Flat. Dead flat. Okay. All right. Questions so far? Let's take a break. Okay. A little short, little 5-minute break or so. Okay. Let's take a break.
What's the beverage policy in here?
Officially, you're not supposed to have anything, but I'm okay with it as long as it has a screw cap. Was it this class that I kicked over the trash can last week? Yeah, it must have been my Thursday class. Clearly not one of my students. Clearly none of you guys. But someone, it must have been those damn photography students, okay? I'm joking, I love our photography students. Someone had placed a soda can in the trash can up here, just a regular aluminum soda can. And it was the darn thing was probably like 3/4 full still. They threw it away. And me being the person that I am, I turned around, I didn't look where I was going, and I knocked over the trash can, and soda just spilled all over the floor. And of course, it had to be, it was the worst possible spot because it was right in front of the instructor station. So if I hadn't cleaned it up, I would have been walking through soda the rest of the afternoon. So I was forced to clean it up. It's horrible. Live online on my live stream. If you watch my Thursday class, we were actually kind of joking around about it. And I did like a live commentary of what I was doing. So I was like, now I'm walking to my office to get the paper towels. It was stupid and silly, but oh well. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's make sure my stream is still going. Looks like everything's good. I know we're still waiting for folks to come back from their break. It's not time to start yet, but I just want to remind everyone of the live stream. I know that last week's live stream was a mediocre success. In that we had video but no audio. I seem to have resolved all those problems. So look forward to seeing the live stream for this week's lecture sometime later this afternoon. YouTube is actually kind of like Johnny on the spot with posting the archives of the live streams. It's pretty great, actually. It's pretty great. I was expecting YouTube to take like a good 24 hours to post the archive of the stream, and they're doing it like within an hour. So yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. So expect to see this live stream show up on my YouTube channel page. If you're not familiar with my YouTube channel, and I'm going to be embedding these inside of Renderography here shortly, but just so you guys are in the know, if you go to youtube.com/user/Pat here's my channel, okay, and I'll view it as public so you guys can see exactly what you'll see on your side, okay? And most importantly, there's a couple things that I've added to my YouTube channel page. The most recent uploads are going to show up here, which is pretty cool. That's going to be mostly where you'll find the content for your show or for this class. However, if you want to go back and find an earlier live stream, here we are, GCOM 424. This is the playlist. This is the playlist for this class. And sweet, look at this. This video without sound has been viewed 119 times, which is kind of crazy, which I think is really kind of exciting, okay? So inside of that playlist, you'll see all of the live streams that we've recorded for this semester. We only have one recorded, so we only got one showing up, okay? So look there for the time being. I'm going to embed these probably someplace on Renderography. It makes sense in my mind to embed each class's playlist inside of our class page. So on Renderography. Okay? More on that as we go. All right. Holy smokes, this is great. People are watching the live streams. This is fantastic. Last week's GCOM 402 video was watched 146 times. That's crazy. That's nuts. That's nuts. It's only a week old. That's exciting. So I am turning into a massive YouTube fan. I think their system is really kind of amazing. I've never had an opportunity to do this, and it's really, I think, paying off in spades. Okay. Questions? Everyone good? Yeah? Peachy keen? Okay, I think we're all back from our break. So let's go ahead and jump back in and continue working on the UV mapping tools. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are two tools that we're going to be working with. We're going to be working with Project from View quite frequently, but we're also going to be working with probably my second favorite tool inside of the entire Modo system. It's called UV Unwrap. You're going to like UV Unwrap, as this allows us to work with cylindrical or organically shaped models a little bit more intuitively, okay? What type of surface are we going to use Project from View on? Planar, flat surfaces. UV Unwrap is really the tool to use for everything else inside of our universe. You can even use it on UV or on planar surfaces as well. I think perhaps the best way to understand the role of UV Unwrap is to just work on a cylinder real fast. Okay. Now I made a, oops, let's make, I wanted it on another one. There we go. Aha, here we go. So I made a new cylinder on a separate mesh item. If we look at the lists tab, you can see that it also has, looks like it adopts the naming convention of my cube UV map. So let's change this to cylinder. There we go. All right. And if we go back and forth, yep. If we go back and forth between the two mesh items, you can see that on the cube mesh item, we're working with the cube UV map. And then on the cylinder mesh item, you can see that the cylinder UV map is coming to the surface. So when you work with unit primitives, as we saw with the cube, Modo is automatically going to generate UV islands for us, UV information. And it's done a rock solid job on this cylinder. But I want to talk about how we get to this result. The top and the bottom of our cylinder are easily made with project from view, but it's this stuff in the center that turns into a little bit of a problem. This is where UV unwrap really starts to shine. I'm going to clear out this UV map and we're going to start over from scratch. So over in my lists tab, I'm going to right click on my UV map, and from that contextual menu, I'm just going to clear it out. Oops. Let's try it again. I had something selected, so only the selected UVs were removed. There we go. And here it is. Okie dokie. Let's do it real fast. Let's do project from view on the top. Control-Shift-A. Project from view as a planar surface, so we can do it pretty quickly. Awesome. Rock and roll. That's a good one. And then we'll grab that one, the bottom, Control-Shift-A. Project from view. There we go. All right. Whenever we generate any UV information, Modo is automatically going to place that UV island in the center of the positive UV quadrant. So the center of our positive UV quadrant in many ways kind of turns into a work area. It's a canvas that we're often going to be finding our stuff placed into. This can get dangerous. This can get messy really fast. If everything is being generated in one spot in the upper right-hand quadrant, it's going to be very difficult to edit our UVs, place them within inside of our map, and really kind of understand how these UVs are affecting the entirety of our object, okay, of our texture map. Okay, so this is something that I often do. I want to select both of those UVs, and I'm just going to move them out of the way. Okay, so move them out of the positive UV quadrant. Come on in, Waddell. We'll just get started. So generally, kind of keep your positive UV quadrant clear and free of your UVs while you're making them. After the fact, after we're done generating all this UV information, we'll go back in and we'll pack all the UVs into our upper right-hand quadrant and make it work, kind of get it in its final form. So the top and the bottom of our cylinder, really easy, really easy. Now we got to worry about the sides. Here's kind of a tip that I've learned just from my own personal experience from working with the UV tools inside of Modo. I do a lot of UVing, okay? I spend more time making UV maps than I really should, okay? So it's kind of turned into my thing. I'm really good at making UV maps. And I've noticed that Modo has a couple quirks, okay? Some nuances within the UV pipeline that influence how their tools are going to create stuff. I've learned that Modo really likes to focus on the polygons that you want it to focus on, okay? It prefers to only have the polygons that we're unwrapping visible within inside the OpenGL viewport. We've already crafted some UV islands for the top and the bottom of our cylinder, so I'm simply going to hide them, okay? How do I hide polygons? I don't want to delete them, I just want to turn their visibility off. Click on the visibility eye. Now, if we click on the visibility icon in the item list, it's going to turn all of them off, right? It's going to turn off the contents of our entire layer like it did just there. I want to hide just a couple polygons. I want to hide, interactively hide. What's going on? There we go. I want to interactively hide just those two polygons. I just want to turn their visibility off. Yes, the H key. H for hide, okay? H as in hotel, hide. So hitting the H key will temporarily just deactivate their visibility. Haven't deleted them, they're just off, okay? With those polygons off, the Modo UV tools now work a little bit better because the polygons that we want to create UVs for are the only ones that are visible within inside of our scene. This helps. Believe it or not, this helps, especially when we're working with UV unwrap. UV unwrap has a very important distinction from project to view. Now go back in time a couple steps ago when you were making the UV islands for your cube. What did you initially have to start with? What was the first step in using project from view? We had to select a polygon, right? Polygon. We had to select a polygon. Project from view relies upon a polygonal selection for its little game to work, okay? UV unwrap, fundamentally different, okay? UV unwrap requires an edge selection, edges. So we got to be in edges mode for UV unwrap to do its magic. Let me jump over into edge mode, and I need to make a selection. Now, a lot of folks, when they're starting to work with UV unwrap, they get really confused as to which edges to select, okay? Here's the cold, honest truth. I don't know. Well, actually, I do know. From my experience with working inside of the UV tools in Modo have directed me down a path. But ultimately, you have to be open to the idea of experimenting, okay? You have to be kind of like a little bit of a mad scientist at this stage. You have to be open to the idea of trying different combinations and different recipes of your edge selections to yield the result that you're after. Here's the overarching principle that I would like to kind of guide you towards, okay? Think of this edge selection like a surgeon's scalpel. And this is dark and morbid, but this is the image that my mind goes to, okay? It's like a surgeon's scalpel. Have you guys ever seen the movie Face Off? John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, classic John Woo film where everything blows up, okay? Love John Woo. Such a great director. Does action movies just phenomenally well, okay? And in Face Off, they physically like take their faces off and they put them on another person, okay? Gotta love Hollywood, right? Well, we're kind of doing the same thing for our, for our 3D models. We're unwrapping them. So we have to cut our model along a very specific part on the mesh itself and kind of pull that object from around the back and kind of pull it out so that it lays flat, okay? So the edge selection that we're going to choose is where the seam is going to be, okay? Maybe a more PG kind of metaphor for this is like a piece of clothing, right? Every piece of clothing on the face of the planet has a seam in it, okay? This is where two pieces of fabric are glued together, sewn together, okay? The edge selection that we choose is the seam of the clothing, okay? Now the shirt that I'm wearing, the seam is along the side, right here, okay? So this is where I'm going to cut my shirt in order to make it lie flat. We're doing the same thing here. We have to make a seam. You have to be okay with the fact that there are going to be seams inside of your UV islands. You'll start to see the role of seams coming up here soon, okay? There are always going to be seams. Don't think that you can't make your UV maps without seams. If you know what I'm talking about, if you have a little bit of experience with UVs, you'll understand that, okay? So let's start with an edge selection. Now for us, I think I'm just going to start with just a vertical selection. Because if you think about this, what we're going to do is that the UV unwrap tool is going to take that edge selection, it's going to slice my cylinder vertically across that edge, and then it's going to iron out those polygons so they're flat. And they lay, just perfectly on our little grid, okay? With the edge selected, now we can start applying our tool. UV unwrap is the third one from the top inside of our UV list. It's right below project from view. It's right there. And UV unwrap works a little different from project from view. We're still going to left click to turn it on, but instead of single left clicking in the OpenGL viewport, we're going to click and drag. Okay, so we'll turn it on. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I apologize. We have to left click and drag in the UV grid. So we're going to left click and drag. You can see what I've got here. Okay. There it is. There's my UVs. Okay? And if you look carefully, it's done a really decent job of trying to figure out how to slice that mesh and iron it out and lay that object flat on our grid.
I've got a strange result.
Okay. Kind of looks like a spaceship. You keep dragging, keep dragging. Now the reason, let me back up for a second because I just noticed that I have my iteration set to 5600. If it's at 0, like yours probably is, yeah. See, there's the spaceship that Dylan was getting, right? Okay, now I'm just left clicking, I'm dragging. I'm dragging, I'm dragging, I'm dragging. You basically want to drag your mouse until it stops moving. I'm dragging, I'm dragging, I'm dragging, I'm dragging, I'm dragging, and poof, there it is. Okay, left click and drag. You might be dragging for a while. And really what you're doing when you're left clicking and dragging is that you're interactively changing this iterations value. That's all you're doing. Watch my screen as I continue to left click and drag while this tool is active. I'm just changing that iterations value. I can even go back in time, and we're on our way. Okay? My mouse cursor was kind of on the left-hand portion of the UV grid, and I dragged to the right. Is yours resolving, Dylan? Let's take a look. See what we got. Okay, do me a favor. Drop the tool for me. And orbit around your scene for a second. Let's just check out what you got. Okay, yep, you got an identical cylinder to mine. Hit undo to get rid of those UVs. And I want you to change one thing. I want you to change your iterations. Oops, no, turn it back on. I want you to change your iterations to 0. Okay, and I also want to change your initial projection type to cylindrical. Okay. Along that, and try to see if that changes anything. Now left click and drag. Keep cruising, keep cruising, keep cruising, keep cruising.
Spaceship.
Okay, so let's. Dylan is consistently getting a different spaceship, and I want to. This is an experience that you may run into. So let's talk about the resolution together as a class. Dylan isn't able to left click and drag and get that little grid. His kind of warps around into what he's calling a spaceship. I think it's a great kind of illustration. Okay, it doesn't look anything like mine. One of the things that I've learned with UV unwrap is that if your object has an opening, as ours kind of does, opening on the top, opening on the bottom, right? We hid those two polygons. Yeah.
I didn't see if you guys had hidden it. I just saw it as an empty space, so it wasn't actually anything.
Okay, well, either way, do this, okay? Before you apply your tool, during your initial selection, select the openings. I've learned that UV unwrap really loves it when there's a border. If there's an opening on the mesh, like I have here, the top and the bottom, selecting that top loop and that bottom loop can help. Aha! So I'll do it again, UV unwrap, boom, I'm on my way. I got a pretty consistent result across the surface of my mesh, and I'm looking good. Okay. Still not working for you, Tomoko. Let's see what you got.
Well,
okay.
See, hide at the top and bottom.
Yep.
And select the edges.
Perfect.
Like you did.
Perfect.
And UV unwrap.
UV unwrap. Okay, so continue left clicking and dragging. Left click, and drag. Is that left click?
Oh.
There you go. Keep going, keep going, keep going. See how it's moving? Oh. Keep doing it. There it is. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, this is the landmine of using UV unwrap. You basically want to left click and drag until nothing moves. Okay? Don't stop dragging your mouse until the polygons kind of deform and unwrap and unfold. No, we want all the pieces. We want the top and the bottom. Yeah, we want to have a UV map for all of the objects on our mesh. Okay. Okay, real quick, I'm going to put all of these polygons. I want to unhide everything. So here's my UV island for the base of my cylinder. There's the top and the bottom, and I'm going to grab all of them real fast and just throw them into that same test material that we were working on before. So now that I have the image wrapping around my model, you can see a couple different things. Let's talk about that first. This, ladies and gentlemen, is your first seam. That line right there. This seam is where the texture is going to begin and end all along your model. You can't hide seams. Or excuse me, you can't avoid seams. They're part of the meshes. You're always going to have a seam, okay? On most models, you're always going to have a seam. So we can't get rid of them, but we can hide them. We can mask them. We can kind of reduce their appearance all along the surface of our geometry if we think through this just strategically. Next week when we start working with our crates, I'm going to show you some ideas that will help you kind of get in the ballpark of how we can reduce the apparent nature of our seams. What also just visually looks wrong about our texture map? Diagonal. Yeah, this is supposed to be a grid, right? And yet all the grid lines are going this way. No good. And going that way. Why? Yeah. The orientation of our UV island is going to determine how that texture is placed on our object. Because our UV island is kind of, angled oddly, so is our texture. Okay? So what do we got to do in this particular situation? Say again?
You select the polygon in the UV.
And do what? What's the end result? What are we trying to do? We're trying to straighten it out, right? We need to get that piece horizontal. There's a couple different ways that we can do this. Give me one way. What's this most simple way of doing it? Just rotating it. Okay? Let's just rotate it. See what we get. I want to select that UV island in my UV grid. Just in my polygons mode now. There we go. And if I fire off the rotation tool, boom. Oops, that's not rotation. Excuse me. E is rotation. I can start placing that texture where I want it to go. And you can immediately see that my texture in here updates. I'm going to drop the tool and drop the selection. Now again, I would like you to look visually at the image on the model. We fixed one problem, but we created another. What's that second problem? They don't continuously go around, but we can't avoid that, okay? That seam is going to be a part of our system. We can't get rid of the seams. What else looks odd? Aligned to what? The checkers, okay? Help me out. What tells you that it's not aligned? Yeah, so I think what B is trying to go and try to say here is that the grid is offset from each other, okay? So that's a problem we're going to fix. But it's not the biggest problem. Look at the image. Look at the image on the model. It's upside down, okay? It's upside down.
My image isn't
On the cylinder? Yeah, just make sure you put those polygons in the same material as your cube. Okay. Okay, you probably need to go into your texture locator and assign the new UV map. Yeah, jump into your shader tree real fast. Test, perfect. Go into your image, perfect. Properties. Yep, there you go. And under your texture locator, you need to tell it, yeah, look, it's on Mario Cube.
right.
Go cylinder. Huzzah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, mine's upside down, so I need to fix it. This is another reason why we like to use these checker patterns, because it's really, really easy to see if our UVs are orientated kind of north, south, east, west correctly. So what do I need to do to my UV island to fix this problem? Seth, what am I going to do?
Rotate it.
Just rotate it 180 degrees, and I'm on my way. I don't need to do anything to the actual image. I just need to change the orientation of my UVs. There it is. And now, at least all the letters and numbers are pointing north, south, east, west as they're supposed to. Okay? So problem number one solved. Let's fix B's problem, because at the seam, the grid pattern still isn't lining up. Now, I've been using the rotation tool, but I've just been kind of arbitrarily rotating my object within the scene. It's not right. It's not perfect, right? My little UV island, it's close, but the orientation of all those polygons are not perpendicular to the axes on the UV grid, right? So we need to get a little bit of precision in this. There's a couple things that we can do. I'm going to select my UV island, and then over here in our UV tools, check it out. we have a really cool tool called Orient Pieces. Okay, Orient Pieces. This is automatically going to analyze all of the edges on our UVs, and it's going to try to move all of those edges, and it's going to move that block so that it's horizontal, okay, or vertical, depending on which choice we choose inside of this tool. There's even an auto, which I hate. I don't like auto anything. I'm not an auto guy. I want to know exactly what the computer's doing. So I'll do Orient Pieces. The direction will be set to horizontal. We'll hit OK, and then boom. It was subtle, but it did kind of go click. Okay? It rotated perfectly. Someone's smoking. Okay. All right. Well, I apologize for the weird smell. Hopefully that smoke will go away. If you guys notice it being really intense in a certain area, let me know. It doesn't... Oh, man, it is... Watch it be like some dude like right on the other side of that wall. Smoking a cigarette, yeah. I was really hoping it was a student. I know, right? That's the thing. It's like, how does it go through a wall, okay? You know? Might be going through the drop ceiling. It could be someone like seriously in like cosmetology going through the drop ceiling because the attic crawl space for all of these rooms are connected. That would be very odd. Okay, well, we'll endure. I apologize. We'll keep going, all right? The joys of working inside of an open lab. All right, so Orient Pieces. Orient Pieces is going to be your friend. You want to use Orient Pieces to align your UV island correctly with inside of our UV grid, okay? Now, the last thing that we got to do is pretty cool, and it's really quite useful. If we look at all the entirety of our UV island, you know, here's the base, and then here's the top and the bottom, right? Well, I need all three of those UV islands to be in that upper right-hand quadrant. I need to pack them. I need to place them inside of that UV space, okay? With either everything selected or nothing selected, packing your UV islands is really easy, okay? We have a dedicated tool here that allows us to do it quickly. I just discovered what it was. Someone smoking in the bathrooms. That's probably what it is. Awesome. Because the bathroom's on the other side of this wall. That's why I'm smelling it really strongly up here. Okay, anyways, so packing our UVs is really easy, okay? We can either select everything or we can leave everything unselected, okay? Because we want to affect everything in our UV island. I want to have everything unselected for the time being, okay? And if you go over into our UV tool pipe, if we find orient pieces and keep cruising down, there it is right there, pack UVs, okay? And you're going to get this popover. Now this popover has a couple landmines that I want to make sure you guys don't step on, okay? You see we have three choices: pack, orient, and stretch. What this really translates into is move, rotate, or move, scale, and rotate, okay? Now we've just spent a considerable amount of effort scaling our objects to the right size and rotating them in the correct positions. So we're going to turn off stretch and orient. We don't want them to make, or we don't want them to, especially orient, we don't want them to rotate it, because it's automatically going to go in and figure out how to shove all these UV islands into this space. I'll leave it as is so you can see what it does. And there we go, okay? What I normally do when I use pack UVs is that I turn off orient, okay? Stretch and pack, yeah, stretch and pack work just fine. So if we do pack UVs, sometimes I just do pack. There we go, okay? I just do pack. So just be careful. At times, stretch will do odd things. Stretch will physically scale that UV island in an odd way to make it fit inside that space. So buyer beware on stretch, okay? Buyer beware on stretch. Okay. Huzzah, and there we go. We're on our way. Perfect. Perfect. I like this. This is a really good result. This is a fantastic result, actually, okay? It's a fantastic result. What we have here are all the UV islands for this cylinder packed beautifully in this upper right-hand quadrant. So here's the base of our cylinder, here's the top and the bottom, okay? And if you look carefully at their size, all of the grid squares on the actual image themselves look to be about the same size, which is pretty cool. So my eyeballs, let's just check it out here. And this just takes some looking, okay? If you look carefully, this square here, okay, is about the same size as these guys over here. About the same size. We're close. We're in the ballpark, okay? We want that. We want to have all the UV islands in proportion to each other, okay? So we have two different things that we're checking out. We're looking at the size, scale, and proportions of the UVs to their 3D counterparts and to themselves, okay? What we don't want to have happen is something that looks like this. What we don't want to have is like these guys, ginormo. We don't want that, okay? Because now that part of our mesh, excuse me, that part of our UV island is dominating more of our texture, and it's outside of the proportions of the other areas. You'll see this in action next week when we start working with the crates. This is an important concept. The larger the UV islands within inside of our UV space, the more pixels we have in our Photoshop document to describe that detail. If the top of our cylinder has more pixels devoted to it in the texture file, it's going to look different, visually different from the rest of the texture map. Okay? You'll see this in action next week, so I'm just going to plant the seed now, and we'll come back to it later. Questions on orient pieces and pack UVs? Okay, great. Great, great, great. Okay. Wow, that smoke is really driving me crazy. I know, right? It's the little things in life that just make my day. Yelling at students who are smoking in the bathroom, one of the perks of being a teacher. I know, right? It's exactly, right? Sometimes people are just weird. Okay. All right. And what's making it worse for me is that I have really crazy allergies, and I'm already really sensitive to smoke. So this is like, just my allergies are going crazy right now. All right. So let's talk for a second about how we're going to be using UV maps in our pipeline. Okay. We're going to be using UV maps to create textures, custom textures that we design in Photoshop. Okay. I want to spend a couple seconds here talking about how we're going to integrate Photoshop into the mix. This is purely going to be the introduction to working in Photoshop. I'm not expecting you guys to go through and create some really stunning results out of this. This is just our first time out, okay? So my expectations are really low. Next week, we're going to start talking about how to really increase the level of detail that we're creating in the textures in Photoshop. Today is just kind of more of a pipeline discussion. I need to get all of these UVs out of Modo and into Photoshop, okay? Because I can't paint all of my stuff here. I got to paint it over in Photoshop where I get the most control. Photoshop, I mentioned this earlier, is the common denominator of all the digital media arts, okay? Everyone uses Photoshop. Doesn't matter if you're a graphic designer, web designer, 3D artist like we are, we use Photoshop to make images. We need to make some texture files for my little cylinder here, and for you guys, your wine barrel, okay? So I need to get all of this lovely UV information out of Modo and into a format that Photoshop can understand. For me, this is one of those areas inside the Modo UV toolset that really got me excited. And I know it seems rather inconsequential, but trust me when I say that this is special. I'm just backing up here. Okay. I want to move these guys out of the way. Something like that. There we go. Okay. To get our UV maps out of Modo and into a format that Photoshop can understand, we have to go to the top of the screen. Okay. But first, before we go any further, I forgot to mention, you need to make sure that your UV map is selected in your lists, so that way Modo understands which UV map to export from the program. Okay. So I got my little cylinder UV map selected. So if I go to the top of the screen where it says texture, check it out. Export UVs to EPS. That's what we're after. That one right there. Say again? What? It's not in a tab. It's at the very top of the screen in the pull-down menus under texture. Texture. Okay, export UVs to EPS. This is actually going to create a vector file of our UVs. Basically, what we're making here is a coloring book, okay? And we're going to color in the lines over in Photoshop, okay? That's all we're doing, okay? It's going to export out our map, identical, pixel perfect. There is no, it is great. This is one of the features that really got me excited when I first started working with Modo. Because in other applications whose name will remain anonymous, but it does rhyme with Smaya. Bad joke. The only way that you used to get your UV maps out of Maya was, and this drove me crazy. Okay, I was sitting in a class being presented by an an Autodesk master artists, and Autodesk has these master artists, and they're the guys that know everything about their products, right? And he was talking about how to get their UV maps out of Maya and into Photoshop so they can paint custom textures, right? And this is how the master artist wanted us to export our UV maps, and drove me crazy. He's like, okay, bring open your UV window, make it as big as you can inside of your viewport, okay? And then hit print screen. Are you kidding me? You were taking a screenshot of your UV map, which is crazy. It was nuts. So being able to export your UV maps into a vector file is awesome. Okay, this actually has much larger implications across our entire network of applications. There's other apps within our ecosystem. One's called Substance Designer, which is fantastic. It's aimed entirely at the game industry. It's incredibly advanced. We're not even going to talk about it. I might show you the app towards the end of the semester, but it prefers vector information, and it's great. Okay, so if we click Export UVs to EPS, here we go. You're going to get a little popover. It's going to ask you for a name and a location. I'm just going to save this to my desktop, and I'm going to call this Pat's cylinder. And here's something that I always do for my UVs. In the file itself, I put UVs, just so I know by looking at the file name that the contents of this EPS file is UV information. Okay, just makes it a little bit easier to consume what's going on a file level. And then we'll just hit save. Boom. So what's happened here is that a new custom file has been created on our computer. And if you look carefully on my screen, there it is right there. That's my file. And if I just hit the space bar and do a quick preview, there it is. There's our coloring book. Okay? And what we're going to do is bring this coloring book into Photoshop and start painting on it. Okay? Well, we're going to do something a little bit more fancy than painting on it. We're actually going to be importing some real-world photographic textures to use as the foundation for our model. So let's open up Photoshop real fast and talk about this process. It's really easy. All this stuff is encapsulated in a series of videos on the web. So if you want a refresher, watch the live stream or watch the videos. Okay? We're going to keep it pretty basic for today, and I mean incredibly basic. I'm going to show you how to do 2 things in Photoshop, and that's it. Okay, that's it. So here's Photoshop. The first thing that we need to do is to get that EPS file into the application. So a simple file open will do what we need it to do. However, it's going to ask you for some specific information. So we'll do file open, open. Go, pat cylinder, down, there it is. We'll hit open. And okay, and then you're going to get this thing, and this is usually where people kind of get derailed because it says rasterized EPS format. What? I don't get this. I don't understand. Remember, this is a vector file. So this is an image that's been created based off of a mathematical algorithm. Photoshop is a pixel-based editor. It wants pixels, not math, to make all of its artwork. So we need to do what's called rasterizing, where we take that computer-driven, mathematically created image and transform it into pixels. We need to make a defined resolution, a defined size. So make sure you change this to pixels, the height and the width. Also, this is critically important. Please make sure the mode gets changed to RGB. We're computer artists, so everything that we do is going to be within the RGB color space. Does anyone know off the top of their head what color space CMYK is used for? Printers, you got it. This is for the traditional print designers. Well, we're not going to print our texture maps. We need to work within the RGB color space so that it looks correct on our monitors. Don't worry about the resolution, but the height and the width we need to pay very, very close attention to. There's a whole series of industry standard height and widths that we need to practice within. These have been developed over the course of the lifespan of computer graphics, okay? So we need to practice and behave within inside of this convention. Our industry has standardized around some very special numbers. These special numbers determine the height and the width of all of our image maps. Our image maps are always going to be square, so their height and width are going to be identical. The low end of what we're doing, we have 256 by 256, okay? 256 pixels by 256 pixels. That's going to produce a relatively small texture map. If we increase that resolution by a magnitude of 2, we're going to get what? What's 256 times 2? 512. 512 by 512. Oops. 1024. What's next? 2048. And, oh, that's supposed to be an 8. 4096. Okay. Those are the numbers that you probably should commit to memory at some point in the near future, because these are the numbers that we're going to be using to generate the size of all of our textures. Okay. Now, some of these are more popular than others. 4096, meh. We can forget that one for this class. Okay. We're never going to be making a texture file that big for all of our game characters. Shoot, I do a lot of feature film stuff, and I don't even make textures that are 4096 by 4096. Okay. Those are huge, huge. Okay. for a lot of characters. And a lot of the stuff that I do my work at what's classified as 2K, 2048 by 2048. That's a good starting point, okay? For almost everything that we're going to be doing in this class, we're going to be living here. 1024 by 1024, also known as a 1K texture, okay? 1K, 1 being 1,000, or the K being 1,000, okay? So 1K images, that's where we're going to live. Now, if you look at the way the structure has been developed, really what we're working with here are square images that are divisible by 2, okay? Powers of 2. Does anyone know why square images? Why not rectangular images? Square images, but what about a character? A character's not a square shape. Yeah. Remember, we're working within a very old system. Our architecture was developed, believe it or not, in the 80s, okay? In the 80s, they were concerning themselves with just how fast it was for the computer to process this information. If everything is by a powers of 2, the math is really easy. We don't have to divide by a really weird number. If everything is by a power of 2, that's something our graphics cards can tune into and also chug through these numbers faster, okay? So it's an optimization kind of thing, right? These are industry standards. They're used all over the place. Expect to see them going forward. So I'm going to change my height and width of my texture file here to 1024 by 1024. There we go. RGB, constrained proportions, on our way. And then if we zoom out, and let's get rid of all this. Oops, excuse me. Yay, there's my texture. Is it there? Yeah, it's there. You can just barely see all the grid lines. They're there. They're almost imperceptible, though, because they're pretty much 1 pixel in size. Those that are coloring book, are UVs. So here's a great little suggestion. We're going to apply what's called a layer style. On layer number 1 over there in Photoshop, that has all of our UV information on it. If I double click on the word layer, I can change its name. I'm just going to say UVs. And here's what I want you to do. If you're following along, I can't recommend this enough. This is a great little extension to our Photoshop toolset that will allow us to more easily see all of our outlines of our UVs. We're going to apply a layer style. Notice that my cursor is on the right-hand portion of that layer, basically in the empty spot of that layer on the right-hand side. If you were to double-click on that area of the layer, check it out. Let me double-click. You're going to apply what's called the layer style. Now, this layer style dialog box has a lot of really powerful stuff in here. Woo! Excuse me, zoomed in too fast. But specifically, what we're going to apply is just a stroke, which is a fancy computer graphics term for outline. So if we apply a stroke, check it out. You can see it update over there on our actual canvas. You can see what's happening. If you click on the word stroke, you get some options. I always kind of tune this down to maybe 1 or 2 pixels. And I almost always pick a color other than black. Why? Yeah, black blends in with everything. Most of the files that we're going to be bringing into Photoshop, most of the pictures that we're going to be using as the foundation for our model are going to include black at some point, or some shade of black, okay? I always make my wireframe, my UV outlines a really outrageous color so that I can easily separate visually the photographs from the outline. Okay, so there we go. That's the first step. After you do this, I need you to save your document. Now, it's important how you save your Photoshop document, okay? Do a save as. If you were just to hit File Save, you would overwrite your UV file, the one that you made at a Modo. We don't want to do that. We want a Photoshop document so we can get all of our layers, all of our work. File, Save As, oops, File, Save As, and Photoshop is going to be the first option in the list. And I'm just going to call this Pat's cylinder. .psd, Photoshop document. All right, now we can start working. In order for us to work and create some results that are pretty cool looking, we're constantly striving for photorealism. We're going to be doing the same in this class. I want you guys to find some realistic images that you can incorporate into your document here in Photoshop. Finding free open source photographs that you can use for your textures is not difficult. Okay, there's a fantastic resource called CG Textures, which is my fave. You're going to like CG Textures. Let's just go to the web real fast. www.cgtextures.com. There it is. CG Textures is a phenomenal open source library of images. They're just photographs. They're specifically been they have specifically been formed and assembled for us in the computer graphics industry, and they provide an excellent foundation for everything that we're going to be doing in this class. We want to use, we want the base of our texture maps to match the real world. The best way to achieve that realism is to use photographs, man. Okay, photographs are the best way to very quickly produce the realism that we want in our scene. You can see that it's broken up. The navigation is broken up into two different sections. We have, a huge library of stuff here. So if you're visual, just click on these little categories in the center. If you're kind of more mechanical like I am, this vertical nav bar makes it very easy and very quick to find the content that you're looking for. Yeah. Every time you change the color, it doesn't do it.
I don't know. I feel like I'm in the wrong section.
You were totally in the wrong section. Click on the word stroke. There you go. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I clicked on the wood category over here on the left-hand side. And you can see all the subcategories. I want my little wine barrel or my cylinder to have kind of that wood plank feel. So this is where I'm going to go. I'm going to go find me some wood planks. This happened to have a category here of nothing but planks. So if we cruise through it, yeah, look at all this stuff. There is, how about bear? Look at all this. This is great. This is exactly what we want to use for our guy. Okay. Now I have to kind of warn you. If you want to download and save any of the images from this website, it does require a username and password. It's free. It's absolutely free. I can't encourage you enough to subscribe to this site. I've been a member of CG Textures for probably 10 years. I've never once got spam email from them. I've always felt very, very comfortable. They're a legit company. With the free version of their service, you get 15 megabytes of downloads a day, okay? Which is pretty good. Just be careful of what you're downloading. Don't download everything you click on. Be selective. Only download the files you think you're going to use inside your Photoshop document. And you're free to save all these files and use them for whatever you want to, which is kind of nice. Okay. There is a pro version, which I think is like $75 a year, and you get 250 megabytes of download a day. I think that's what it is. It's kind of crazy. I've only ever had the free version. I've never run into that limit, the wall, the 15 megabyte wall. I'm very careful with what I download. So sign into the site, make a username and password. It's free. Use it. You'll love it. Okay. Now I've already downloaded a lot of the stuff from this site, so I'm not going to download anything from here. But I am going to open up some Photoshop or some textures that I downloaded from the site earlier today. I keep everything. Let's do wood textures. Let's find a good. These are some of my faves. I save everything whenever I have. That'll work. What, open? And I've just opened that file inside of Photoshop. So if you look at what I got here in Photoshop, I have two images. Okay, I have my UV map, and then I have a photograph of some wood planks. I need to get, yeah. Okay, I will. I need to combine these. I need to get all of the information from my wood planks image over here into my open Photoshop document for my texture. Okay, it's really easy how to do this, okay? Or it's really easy to do this. Does anyone know how? So your screen may not be completely like mine. If your images are docked in a palette like this, see how I have it in tabs? I hate tabs. This drives me crazy. I really don't like it, okay? I like to have all of my Photoshop stuff in separate floating windows. So, what? Different workflow in Modo? Much different workflow. I don't like tabs inside of Photoshop because for me in Photoshop, I'm pulling information from all these different open documents at the same time. So it's just kind of a workflow killer. So what I do is I grab a tab and I left click and drag it down so it tears off that tab into its own floating window. Now that I have it in my own floating window, check it out. See this layer? Everything in Photoshop is layer based. So if I just grab that layer and left click and drag it into my Photoshop document, boom. Now I've placed that layer inside of my texture file. Now it's pretty big. It's ginormo. So what do I need to do to my texture file? Scale it down. Scale it down. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's what we're doing. Inside Photoshop, what we're going to be using is a tool called Transform. Just make sure if you're doing the same thing, just make sure that the layer that has your wood grain texture on it is selected, and then just go to the top of the screen where it says Edit, Free Transform. Command T. That's a good one to commit to memory. When you do that, you're going to get a whole bunch of tools up at the top of the screen. And there's actually a bounding box around this image, but my image is so big that we can't see the bounding box. So here's my little trick. I've been doing this for years. Okay, inside of Photoshop. Here's the height and the width percentage. Okay, see the little chain link? If you click on them, it's going to constrain the proportions. And these are all sliders. If you put your cursor on the letters, I can just interactively slide and scale that thing down. Yeah, that's a good question. Let me do this real fast, and I can show you. And I'm just going to get this texture file kind of right in the ballpark of my UVs. If I drag it down below my UV islands, now I can see exactly the placement of this texture in relationship to the UVs. Okay, very much is kind of like a coloring book. Whatever's on the interior of our UV islands is going to show up on our model. Don't worry about the exterior. Like if you look closely here on my screen, you can see that parts of my image are outside of my UV islands. That's okay. Only what's on the interior of our UV islands is going to show up on the model, right? Because you know from experience already that the interiors of our UV islands are the only places where those surfaces exist. Outside of those UV islands, it's nothing, okay? So we're only concerned about what's on the inside, not the outside. So we can be sloppy. We can go outside the lines. In this coloring book, you are allowed to paint outside the lines, okay? Now, Dylan asked, how do I combine them from one to another? Let's do it again, right? I like to have all of my images floating in different windows because it makes it very, very easy for me to combine layers from other documents into new ones. So I'm just going to drag and drop, Dylan. Here's the layer from my wood plank texture. Drag it into my open Photoshop document in the back, and I'll let go. Okay. Now I have two layers that are identical. How do I make my layer smaller? That new one. What's the keyboard shortcut? Command T. T for transform. Okay. And it's going to allow you to move, rotate, and scale your object inside your Photoshop document. Edit, free transform, or Command T. Just going to use this little slider here to make the size of this image smaller. And I'm just going to place it right there. That's maybe a little too big still. Here, I'll do this. This is kind of cool. I'll do something like that. Okay? And then I'm going to basically duplicate that layer. Really easy to duplicate the layer. Check it out. If you drag and drop it, see at the bottom of our layers palette over here, we have a couple little buttons. Okay, we'll talk about the role of these buttons. Here's a trash can. If you drag a layer onto the trash can, you'll delete it. If you drag a layer an existing layer onto the Create New Layer button, it'll duplicate that layer. Okay? That's what I'm going to do. Boom. Now I got 2. And if I grab the Move tool, move that layer where I need it to go. Something like that. All right. So that's my texture file. That's my custom-made texture that I'm going to use for my wine barrel. You're going to do this exact same process for your wine barrel. Okay? If you need a little bit more support working with inside of Photoshop, the lab staff they are masters at Photoshop, so you'll get a lot of support as well. Modopedia has a fantastic, fantastic section inside the texturing section devoted towards this process. Check them out. Also, grab the live stream and navigate to this portion to get a small refresher as to what we just talked about in class, okay? This is basically all I want you to do for your wine barrel. If you want to go further, I'm never going to say no, okay? But this is the baseline expectation, to download some photographs, throw them into your texture map, and then the last step is to get this out of Photoshop and back into Modo, okay? We're doing the full loop. We brought it into Photoshop, now we got to get out of Photoshop, okay? So I want to save my Photoshop document here real fast. Have a good one. File save, okay? And before I export my image from Modo, or from Photoshop here, I need to do one thing, because whatever's in my Photoshop document upon export is going to be what we see over in Modo. So what do we need to change? Yeah. You got it. You guys are all right. We're going to turn off our UV layer. Now, we don't want to delete it. We want to keep that there. We're just going to turn off its visibility by clicking on the eyeball icon in our layers palette over here, this guy. So we're just going to turn it off, and then we'll do File, Save As, because now we don't want to save out a Photoshop document. Okay, Save As, and we want to save out a PNG. The PNG file format, in my opinion, is the best file format for textures. It creates a very small file size. It also preserves transparency. So if you have transparent areas on your texture, it saves all that. JPEG, the worst. Never use JPEG. It highly compresses your image, and it doesn't support transparency. Okay? That also helps the PNG file format is open source and free to use. You don't have to worry about anyone claiming any sort of royalty for the images that you make with this technology. Okay, so I like PNG. It's universal, it's cross-platform, it's the best. So I'm saving out a PNG. Saved it to my desktop. You'll get this option. Just hit None. You're on your way. Now that we've exported our document from Photoshop, let's jump back over here to Modo and apply it to the material into my cylinder. Now, all of these polygons on my cylinder are encapsulated by this test material, that guy right there, okay? So how do I import an image map into Modo and apply it to that material group? What's the workflow? Bingo, Dylan's got it. So if you go to the top right-hand corner of your interface, inside of your shader tree, you'll see this Add Layer button. Add Layer. And what we're looking for is Image Map. Inside the Image Map category, you have 4 different options, or 5 different options now. Load image, load sequence, new image, new sequence, use clip browser. What do we want to use? Load image. Load image, absolutely. Let's load in an image. It's going to bring open your OS dialog box. I placed all my stuff on the desktop. There it is. There's the PNG. Make sure you're grabbing the PNG, not the cylinder, and there's the result that we have. Okay? Huzzah, mission accomplished. Yeah. Do which part? So we're putting the texture back on the model. Yeah. Okay. Let's walk through that sequence again. I want to hit undo, okay? Now, one of the important things that I really like to encourage people to do is just have your material group already selected, okay? If your group, that little icon right there is generated when you hit the M key, right? And in my mind, it's nothing more than a folder, okay? So if you have your folder selected when you add the image map in, the image map is just automatically going to go into that folder, okay? So with the image map, or excuse me, with the material group selected, go to the top of your shader tree where you find Add Layer. Under Add Layer, where we're going, is Image Map. This is the texture file. Image map and texture map are the same thing. And then we're going to load in an image. It's going to open your OS Finder window. And let's see, mine is right there, patcylinder.png. So if I hit open, there it is. It shows up on my mesh. Now, if yours doesn't show up on your mesh initially, just make sure the texture locator for that image map is where it needs to be. So you can see that Pat Cylinder is selected. Under Properties, I can examine the texture locator for that image map. And what I'm looking at down here is the projection type. Need to make sure it's set to UV map, and then you're choosing the correct UV map for that item. And it should just work just dandy. Yeah. File, save as. Yeah, and then save it as a PNG. Other questions? Yeah.
How do I get the wood texture on top of the UV thing?
In Photoshop?
How do you do that again?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the open document file, right? Grab that layer and just drag it over there.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions? Yeah.
When this is a while back, and I apologize, but I was able to follow along. But
Perfect.
when you made the UV for the cylinders, how did you get in the list tab? How did you get the automatic kind of? What I'm trying to say is I never got an additional UV map in the list tab.
Have a good one.
What I'm trying to say is I never got a new texture thing.
Yeah.
To rename.
Actually, you did.
I did.
That's a new UV map. But
Right
for
there.
whatever reason, yeah, the one that says cube,
Mm-hmm.
the one is just for whatever reason, it's using the same name as your other one.
That is so confusing.
It's stupid. It's really kind of lame.
I'm
okay.
sorry, that
Yeah.
threw me off. Okay.
It throws me off.
Okay.
It throws me off too. The best way to visually confirm
Mm-hmm.
the UVs that you've got going on, look at what item you got selected. Okay.
Okay.
So you know you're on the cylinder item. You can
Right.
see your cylinder in the OpenGL viewport.
Right.
You can also see the UVs. That's just a name. So rename it.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that. I missed that part.
Yeah, it's just a name. It's a name. Yeah, it's kind of silly. I wish the default name should be texture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can I like unwrapping for the skewer?
For the sphere. Yeah, the sphere is kind of a fun one. Let me wrap some things up and I'll come give you a hand. Okay? I'll wrap up the lecture portion, then we'll go into lab, and I'll answer your question. Give me 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Okay, real quick, guys, before we break into open lab, I just want to kind of wrap things up and ensure everyone's on the same page for the expectations this week. Okay, for the homework and the lab assignment. You can knock out the lab assignment pretty quickly if you're on your way. We got about 20 minutes left in class. So if we revisit renderography.com real quick, you'll find that under the lab assignment, I've given you, well, here's the lab project file that I would like you to use. Okay, it's under the resources section. On the lab assignment itself, what you're going to be doing is that you're going to be UV mapping these 3 shapes, a square, a sphere, and a cylinder. You've already done 2 of them, okay? So just do it again inside of this new project file, okay? I would like you to use the checker pattern. Okay, I would like you to use the checker pattern. Okay. If you look at the requirements for this project, you can see in the checklist there, you're making a UV map for the square, the sphere, and the cylinder, and then use the UV checker material preset or the image that we found. Okay, and you're on your way. Now you don't necessarily have to make a render of this. Okay, I just want the LXO. Okay, I just want the LXO. Oh, I apologize. I did want to render. I forgot. So make a render and give me the LXO. Okay. The render doesn't have to look as pretty as mine. It could just be the quickest render that you've ever made. This is purely an exercise on skill and technique. Okay. When you're done with this assignment, please make sure it's going into the UV Lab Dropbox on D2L. Did anyone run into issues working with D2L last week? Okay. This should be a fast one. You should, you know, if you've been following along, you probably have already knocked it out. All right. Okay, that's the lab assignment. Homework due next week by the beginning of class is worth 50 points. As I mentioned earlier, making a wine barrel. Okay, you're making a wine barrel. A couple of things that I want you to really focus on. I want you to make the geometry for the wine barrel. Spend some time trying to make this as nice of a wine barrel as you can. Okay, and then most importantly, you're going to be making the UV map for your wine barrel. And a little scene, okay? And when I mean a little scene, I mean like 3 walls, okay? I mean very, very basic. I'm not asking for anything, you know, stupendous here, okay? But our images should always provide some sort of context, okay? We should understand the role of this wine barrel in the environment that it's living in. So if you look at the successful examples that I've shown you below, each one of these examples gives us context to this wine barrel. It helps us understand the size of the wine barrel. It helps us understand how the environment is affecting the look of the wine barrel. So very, very simple. You'll also need a UV map for those scene elements. If you look at each one of these examples, you know, this is probably the most complex one, okay? And it's got 3 walls and you're done, all right? Should be very basic. Should be very basic. Also make a very, very simple, and I mean ridiculously simple texture map. Don't put a lot of effort into it. I just want you to practice the pipeline. Tomoki, you have a question? You look... The barrel? I'm going to leave that up to you. What basic shape is the barrel? Cylinder. So I'd start with the cylinder tool. Okay? Really? The plugin for PNG is missing.
Not plugin, but to say that PNG is not there.
Okay.
That's weird. I've never had that problem.
Yeah, I've never had that problem. Give me 2. Let me wrap up this and come give you a hand, okay? When you're done with this, please make sure you're rendering it at the correct size, okay? So don't forget to change your size. 1280 by 720. Everything that we do in here is going to produce a render at 1280 by 720, so get used to changing your render size. I'm holding you to this expectation. I want you guys to leave this class with some really nice images that you can use in your portfolio, okay? This is a great way for us to enter into that scene. Also, when you render, save it as a JPEG, and I need to see both. Both your LXO and your render in the Dropbox by next Wednesday, okay, at 1 p.m. Questions on the homework? The lab you probably can knock out pretty quickly. Homework's going to take a little bit more time to get done. I'm going to leave you to figure out how to design your barrel. It can be any shape. I would suggest starting with reference, okay? Now, are you going to model each individual plank? No, don't model each individual plank, okay? If you're here, I'll help illustrate wine barrel, okay? Wine barrel is a very simple shape to make, okay? Okay, see, there's a wine barrel. A little loopy slice action here. I always like to work with the center line. Okay, to get you started, if you take that center line, scale it up, now we're on our way. Okay, just make sure the top and the bottom are identical. Okay, a wine barrel is a fantastically simple shape. It's really easy to make a wine barrel. There we go. There's the start. I would also probably go in and slice this a couple more times to produce some cool little bands. Huh? No, this days of subdivision are over. Yeah. So if you wanted, I think that's pretty cool to add some little metal bands along the outside. Simply beveling these out will give you a pretty good result. Okay. That was maybe a little too much. My proportions are off, but that should at least kickstart your creativity and understand the shape that we're trying to make. Okay. Very basic. Look at reference, look at reference, look at reference.
After I do it,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I can't do anything.
Ah, yes. Okay. That guy.
Okay.
There it is.
Where is that duplication thing that you said?
If you drag that layer down to the bottom, that one right there. Yep. Now it duplicated it. And then that's the move tool. All right. B, what's going on? Did you fix it?
No.
No, okay.
Technical issues.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, I never had this problem before.